As a fellow writer, I was bowled over by Mengiste's effortless management of an epic and ambitious structure. As a hungry reader, I loved the way she found within that structure a personal, intimate, and tragic story centered on luminous, living, breathing characters. As a Booker judge, I was completely convinced by the end result, which is both huge in its sweep and personally owned by Hirut, the fierce and resourceful protagonist, who is dealing with wild events well beyond her previous experience. The story is important, really the opening shots of the Second World War, but rarely told before, and the whole is wrapped in gorgeous lyrical prose of the highest quality. Its place on the shortlist merely confirms its status as one of the great novels of the year.
When reading this book, the reader's taken on an extraordinary journey because you have these two very different registers in which the novel operates. So on one hand, it is a novel about this incredibly significant historical period in Ethiopia, when Haile Selassie has gone off into exile in Bath, the Italians have invaded, and it's basically up to the Ethiopians who remain to try and launch resistance. So it's on one hand the story of that historical moment and of the Ethiopian resistance, but it's also a very intimate story. At the heart of it, you have two women and a man. First, it starts off with these jealousies between the women and then unexpected alliances. And actually, as a reader, you don't know the journey you're going to be taken on because it starts in such a domestic, intimate sphere, and then it moves into this historical epic space. And you have, in addition, you have the figures of the Italians who've come in, very different kinds of characters. And you move from the battlefield to the most intimate space of the home. So what journey will you be taken on? Many journeys.
I grew up hearing of this war as an epic event. It created seismic shifts in Ethiopia. So in my child's imagination, this was always an epic story, and I found the form through Greek literature, through Ethiopian storytelling. I found that form when I was writing my book, and that felt like the best way to tell it because it was an epic story. This was a global event. I think that in many ways war was thought of by my characters definitely, but in real life as an opportunity for women to shift their place in society. War creates chaos, and in that chaos is opportunity for change. I think that every time we read history, we have to understand that this is a telling of what happened, but not the full story. And we speak about history forgetting certain groups of people, but I think we also have to think about history just completely jumping over them, not forgetting, but creating these voids. And fiction in many ways can fill in those gaps and tell a truth that's much greater than a historical narrative.
There are always things in history that aren't recorded. What we call fact, very often we just mean the things that people have written down about it or have recorded about in some way that remains. And I think one of the things this book does is suggest that the women's stories are often left out of those historical accounts. And in a lot of ways, then you rely on the fiction writer to go back and look at what is there, those little details of the women's lives, and then use the elements of the imagination and of empathy to stitch them together to create that larger story which the official history hasn't told. So I think it says that actually the historical novel is a very rich and fertile place, and that it would be foolish to think of it as made up, because I think the really smart writers will fill in the gaps rather than do a pure invention.
Aster is a glorious figure astride her horse. She has loosened her braids, and thick strands of hair fall against her neck and spread like a dark curtain around her sunlit face. She snaps the animal to a trot across the crest of the hill, her cape fanning around her figure, the golden clasp trapping flints of afternoon light. "Women," she shouts, "sisters, are you listening to me?" Her voice rises into the sky, a blade slicing through the valley below, startling the women from their tasks, forcing them to lift their heads and turn in her direction. Sisters, are you ready for what's to come? Ethiopia's gifted Asmari will sing of this day for years, of how the women drop their baskets and their jugs, how they push away their looms and piles of wool. They rise to their feet nearly in unison, unaware of their own glory, and lift their faces toward Aster's voice, that they pause long enough to listen to the soft tap of distant gunfire is a detail that the songs will repeat again and again. The musicians will make of the women's frowns a forewarning of what's to come. The singers will use the women's gasps and exclamations as signs of their growing strength. One Asmari after the next will sing these words as they play their masinko. That first battle cry was already forming in the women's throats. Aster knew she just needed a way to usher it out. The women were ready but did not know it. There were bullets to be made and gunpowder to mix and rifles to load and enemies to shoot. Women, those who can make bullets, come to me. Aster's voice carries across the valley before breaking into echoes and scattering into the horizon. She is one woman. She is many women. She is all the sound that exists in the world.
Maaza Mengiste is a wonderful writer, just sentence by sentence, and it's a writing style that is really interesting because it has to somehow carry both the epic quality and the intimate quality of the novel, and there are moments where it's quite heightened, and she uses the idea of a Greek chorus in there, and you can feel some of that language of the classics in there, but I don't mean in an anachronistic way, I mean in a really powerful kind of way. And it makes it a joy to read because there is so much complexity going on. The writing isn't showy. It's not saying, hey, look at me, look at all I can do with a sentence, but it's incredibly powerful, often very taut. But it also can move, as you say, into these really lyrical registers that are really quite beautiful. But it can also, when it's writing about war, just be quite fierce and make you feel that adrenaline rush of being on the battlefield.
I think what has been really inspiring for me as I think back to 1935, which was an anti-fascist uprising, the first anti-fascist fighters were Ethiopian, to see these uprisings happening around the world. People are still here fighting. If my great-grandmother were alive and she saw this, I think that she would be very proud and also wonder what the fuss was about, because she was not the only one. There were women from all across Ethiopia who were in the front lines and who were fighting, and this has been done in Ethiopia historically. So she would wonder, why is this such a big deal? This was our country, so of course I'm going to fight. But I think she would be very proud and happy that this story is better known now.